Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 26th of November of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting day, and today we have another day of escalation. And of course the escalation is coming over these days from the Western countries because according to information we have, the resolution 494, NATO after the Washington summit, future-proofing the alliance and supporting Ukraine until victory. 25th of November 2024, presented by the Political Committee and adopted by the Plenary Assembly of the 17th Annual Session of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly held in Montreal, Canada on Monday 25th November 2024. The NATO Assembly has adopted a resolution calling for the provision of long-range missiles to Ukraine. Of course, basically this assembly doesn't resolve anything, but this is the first sign. This is media attack. This is something that Western countries wants to show their people, their population, that it's time to start preparing for war, a huge war between Russia and NATO countries. Furthermore, we have reports that most likely all these talks are about the Tomahawk missiles. NATO has adopted, this assembly has adopted a resolution calling for Ukraine to be provided with medium-range missiles that can hit targets at a distance of 1,500 kilometers. In particular, this could be about the Tomahawk missiles. And you know that the main purpose of this supporting is not like, of course, to destroy Russia. It's impossible, probably. The main purpose of NATO countries is the possibility of carrying out preventive precision strikes. So most likely the Western countries know already the targets they want to attack, first of all, and to attack them. It might be there are hundreds of 200s or thousands of targets that the Western countries will try to attack at the moment, and this will allow them maybe to stop the Russians, to slow the Russians down, or at least to get at the first seconds of possible war the full initiative in their hands. And maybe after taking initiative in their hands, the Western countries, more precisely France, United Kingdom, maybe Poland, will send their forces on the territory of Ukraine with the purpose to stabilize the situation, maybe even to counterattack the Russians in the eastern part of Ukraine with the purpose to force the Russians to fall back. So this is the plan of the Western countries. At least this is something that we can see in media. Maybe there is more plans, more additional paragraphs, but once again, this is something that we can see, we can discuss, and we can make conclusions. As for the Russians, they have also their plans, and for example, today we got report that Russia categorically rejects any options for freezing the conflict in Ukraine. That was stated by the head of intelligence of Russian Federation. Furthermore, we have very interesting report that this winter, this upcoming late November and early December, the Russians are planning to sign an agreement with Iran. I'll remind you that something like this was already signed with North Korea several months ago, and after that we start receiving updates that North Korea sent their troopers on the territory of the Kursk region with the purpose to counterattack the Ukrainian forces on the territory of Russian Federation. So something the same will be signed with Iran, and obviously this alliance is getting stronger and stronger. We don't know for sure whether the Iran is going to sign the same agreement with North Korea, but if so, then this is something like NATO, very powerful alliance, let's say in the Eurasia. Furthermore, today we have reports that Vladimir Putin is going to visit Minsk. Putin will be in Minsk on December 6th, where he will take part in the meeting of the Supreme State Council of the Union State. Union State is the state between Russia and Belarus. And according to information we have, by the end of the 2024 in late December, Russia and Belarus are going to sign the same agreement. So now we see the square: Belarus, Russia, Iran and North Korea is the fourth state that are planning to create another military alliance in Eurasia, and most likely this military alliance is going to be the main priority and the main target for the NATO countries. Obviously, this is not something that is making without a reason. Obviously, the Russians and NATO countries have their own targets, and most likely these two alliances forces are going to discuss and going to find out who is stronger, obviously on the territory of Ukraine. As for the territory of Ukraine, we have lots of reports from this country. Massive attack today was stated by different sources. A swarm of drones attacked Kiev and Ternopil, Ukraine armed forces facilities. At Ternopil was attacked by Shahids. 120 plus armored drones were expected today. Later we got additional details what exactly the Russians were attacking and how many drones were involved in that attack. And according to Ukrainians, the Russians used up to 188 drones on the territory of Ukraine. 67 were brought down by the Ukrainians, 67s, and stopped 100 and plus drones they lost by location. Furthermore, the Russians used 4 Iskander missiles, but Ukrainians are saying that they haven't managed to bring them down. So that was an answer to the Ukrainian attack on the territory of Kursk region. Now today the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation made a very interesting statement. So the Russians reported that according to confirmed data, in the last 3 days the armed forces of Ukraine carried out 2 strikes at objects in Kursk region by long-range Western-made weaponry. On the 23rd of November, the Ukrainians fired with 5 US-made ATACMS operational tactical missiles at the positions of an S-400 anti-aircraft battalion near Lotarevka. So this is the village where Ukrainians tried to attack, and according to information we have, as a result of this attack, the Ukrainians most likely managed to damage or to destroy several S-400 systems. Maybe not like launching systems, maybe radars, but the systems as a one unit was damaged, maybe not one, maybe even more. And later on the 25th of November, the Ukrainians attacked with ATACMS missiles the Kursk airfield that located to the west of the city itself. And also we have the pictures of parts that the Russians managed to discover in the vicinity of the airfield. The Russians confirm that as a result of those attacks, the Russians had casualties among soldiers, among personnel, servicemen, and the Russians are saying that probably several S-400s were damaged or destroyed. And in the end of this statement, the Russians reported that the Ministry of Defense controls the current situation and that the Russians are going to strike back. And now we're coming to the most important part, because the Russians closed the sky in the eastern part of Ukraine. The Russians are doing right now the same thing that they did before the attack in Dnipro, and most likely the Russians will attack the territory of Ukraine within the next several days. And this is exactly what we were talking about. The Western countries will continue attacking deep inside of Russia, not because they want additional escalation. First of all, they want to understand whether their air defense systems are able to bring Russian missiles down. This is the most important, and they will attack the territory of Russian Federation as long as it needs, until they find answer to this question, or until they find a solution how to bring these ballistic missiles down. So let's wait and see what is going to be next, but obviously nothing good is going to happen for Ukraine during the next several weeks until the 20th of January. Now let's go to the line of combat contact. We continue receiving updates from different mappers. Today we got confirmations that indeed the Russians managed to take the village of Bilogorye, the eastern part. The Russians managed to improve their positions in the southern part of Malotokmachka. Currently, it's very difficult to understand whether the Russians launched their full-scale offensive operation in the Zaporozhye direction, but obviously the Russians are currently maintaining the line of combat contact, maintaining the gray zone, probably with the purpose to prepare the foothold before a fast lightning attack in the future. When this future is going to happen, currently nobody can say, but obviously the Ukrainians now are forced to bring additional forces into the direction of Orekho with the purpose to stabilize the situation. As for the South Donetsk direction, as for the village of Velika Novoselov, as you can see, we have a lot of icons from this area. The situation is very difficult, and the Ukrainians admit that the fortifications in the Zaporozhye will simply be bypassed by the Russians. This exactly, now everybody understands in the world, it's not something new. This is not something that was created by the Russians, and the Russians are the only side, the only party that know this plan. Obviously, everybody in the world understands where the Russians are planning to attack, and they're planning to move between 2 defense belts. If the Russians are able to succeed this operation, then the Ukrainians most likely would be completely defeated. The Ukrainians' defense build would be cut in two, and from this configuration, nobody can tell us for sure where exactly the Ukrainians would be able to stop the Russians down. Now let's talk about the village of Velika Novoselka. Lots of updates, with lots of mappers reported and many other things. The Russians are saying that as a result of clashes, they managed to improve their positions and already take under control this part of the settlement. So the clashes are taking place already in the borders of the town itself. Some Russian sources reported that the Russians managed to get even deeper inside of the settlement, and according to information we have, the Russians managed to dig in deeper along the Vishneva Street. So summarizing everything, most likely this is already the territory of very heavy clashes and possible Russian control. This is the territory where the Russians have a better and bigger initiative in comparison with the Ukrainians. Furthermore, we start receiving lots of videos of how the Russians were FPV droning the Ukrainians in the city itself, in the town itself. Lots of FPV drone attacks, and as you can see, most of attacks took place against the Ukrainian light vehicles, which means that the Ukrainians are trying to evacuate wounded servicemen, the Ukrainians are trying to bring additional forces, but everything is under complete Russian control. So let's wait and see what is going to be next, but I believe that during the next 12 hours we're going to receive significant changes on map in this area. As for the common situation, I have a lot of questions. Today we haven't added this icon on map. We will discuss this in details probably during the next video, but today the General Syrsky reported that Ukrainians are preparing another counter-offensive operation. That this is pretty weird and pretty interesting what exactly the Ukrainians are planning to create, what kind of counter-offensive operation the Ukrainians are planning to conduct. It's very interesting because that Ukrainians are suffering losses everywhere. The Ukrainians are losing the ground in the South Donetsk direction, Toretsk, everywhere. But on the other side, military experts are saying that all these losses are due to very big problems with supply support and many other factors. But on the other side, we can make a conclusion that maybe the Ukrainians are allowing the Russians to exhaust themselves. They're gathering forces somewhere, and when time comes, the Ukrainians will conduct a very powerful counter-offensive operation, maybe once again on the territory of old Russia. Nobody knows for sure what exactly is going to happen, but if this happens, the Russians may start something new, may turn the quality of the special military operation in something bigger. Now let's move about the northern flank of the Velika Novoselovka. Today we have lots of reports that the Russians took under control the village of Razdolne, and now the most important target for the Russians, the most important task is to take under control this company stronghold. This is the area of 4 main clashes, and the Ukrainians still, at least by the end of the 25th and by the beginning of the 26th of November, this stronghold was under complete Ukraine control. As for the end of the 26th of November, we haven't received anything that can confirm Russian control, but obviously this is the territory of main clashes because the Ukrainians realize and understand if they are forced to fall back from this territory, and if the Russians are able to take this road and this stronghold under control, complete control, this is going to be the beginning of a complete disaster for the Ukrainians in the Zaporozhye direction, because from this stronghold the Russians will enter operational space, and that it doesn't mean that the Russians are going to attack Velika Novoselovka from the north. By taking this stronghold, the Russians will be able to move even further in the northwestern direction, probably in the area of the village by the name of Kamar, because the Russians will be completely free in making decisions where to go next. Now let's talk about the Uspenovka stronghold. There are very heavy clashes, nothing special during the previous 24 hours, just reports about complete control over the villages of Elizavetovka, Ilinka and Romanovka, and probably tomorrow we will adjust the map in Russian favor, and we're gonna start receiving first updates about the clashes on the territory of Veseloga and Ganovka. There are very heavy clashes. We have lots of videos confirming additional progress on the ground. We have lots of videos that show us the significant number of vehicles that the Russians were using for these attacks. So let's wait what is going to be next. Now let's talk about the city of Kurakhova itself. During the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything special. There are very heavy clashes in the central part. The Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours conducted several counter attacks, but what is happening here You know that yesterday we got the video how the Russians managed to take under control the central part of Kurakhova. In this video we can see how the Russian vehicles landed in the vicinity of this high-rise building, and then the Ukrainians tried to counterattack. The thing is that most of the mappers based on this video have adjusted the eastern part, everything to the east, under complete Russian control. But I believe that the situation is a little bit different. I think that the Russians managed to send some marine forces, and marine forces established something like a foothold in the central part, and the marine forces, stormtroopers, managed to cut the city of Kurakhova in two along this line. And while the Ukrainians are trying to counterattack with the purpose to unblock their forces that stuck in the eastern part of the central Kurakhova, the main Russian forces are moving through the city from the east in the western direction. So I believe that something like this is happening right now. Anyway, if the map is not correct about the changing of the color, obviously during the next several days it will be completely correct, and most likely the Russians will be able to get even more. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the Selidova direction. The Russians are moving. The Russians are not so fast as they're in the Kurakhova direction, but even from this territory we continue receiving updates that allow us to change the map. In this video we can see how the Ukrainians destroyed the temporary deployment point of the Russian forces. This building was attacked by artillery most likely, and based on this video we have adjusted the map in this part of Petrivka. As you can see, there is a very big gap between the confirmed territories and unconfirmed territories, which is very interesting, and I believe that we need to wait for additional updates. According to different sources, the Russians continue moving in the western direction, but without any geolocations, and this is very weird. Too big gap right now, too big gap, and it's better to have start receiving some geolocations to confirm this progress, because without geolocations it's very difficult to understand whether this information is correct or not. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Chasiv Yar Sivers direction. As for this territory, we have several updates, and the most important are coming from the city of Kramatorsk. The Russians, as a result of reconnaissance operation, managed to discover the concentration of Ukrainian forces, and as a result of Iskander strike with the cluster warhead, this temporary deployment point was destroyed. This is very important video because we see that somebody, the Russians, I'll remind you that during the previous months, during the previous several months, we were talking a lot about this direction, mainly about fake reports that the Russians gave us about control over Vyemka, Verkhnekamenskaya, Serebryanka, Grigorovka, and many other things. Those were fake reports that were sent by the local commander to the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation. Basically, the Russians haven't managed to take even a square kilometer from those reports and something like this. But now, starting of November, everything changed. We've been talking a lot about this. Since the beginning of this month, the Russians attacked the Siversk direction heavily with a significant number of FABs of artillery. The Russians are trying to destroy everything that can be familiar with the temporary deployment points. In this video on the 24th of November, the Russians discovered the temporary deployment point of the 30th Mechanized Brigade, and as a result of Iskander strike with the cluster warhead, the deployment point was destroyed. In this video we can see how the Russians destroyed another pontoon bridge with the Iskander strike, and the pontoon bridge was destroyed. In the second part of the video we can see how the Russians destroyed the bridge in the same Sivers direction. Also, we have the video of how the Russians destroyed the bridge along the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass, along the river, the Siversk river. We have reported that another bridge in the vicinity of Zakitne was destroyed as a result of attack. We have the video how the Russians discovered the concentration of Ukrainian forces, maybe of 12th Azov Brigade or something like this, and as a result of Iskander strike, that base also was destroyed. Also, we have the video of another destroyed bridge in the vicinity of Donetsk and Raigorodok as a result of missile strike. Also, we have the video of how the Russians discovered another temporary deployment point in the vicinity of Kramatorsk. So as you can see, the Russians changed the quality of their work, of their military work in this direction. And all these changes, first of all, are connected with one simple thing. Today we got report that the Russians changed the general. That general that was lying to the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation was dismissed and replaced by another general. His name is Alexander Sanchik. Now he is responsible for this direction, and as you can see, he has completely different approach in the Sivers direction, and all these updates about missile strikes, logistic collapse of the armored forces of Ukraine tell us that the Russians are preparing the Slaviansk direction before full-scale offensive operation that most likely is going to take place in the early 2025 after the end of the battle for Siversk itself. As for the southern Kupiansk direction, we haven't received anything special. As for the northern Kupiansk direction, we have several important updates. The Russians reported that as a result of decisive actions, units of the group of forces west managed to establish complete control over the village by the name of Kopanki. Based on the report of the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor. Furthermore, some reliable Russian resources reported that as a result of fast lightning and unexpected attack, the Russians managed to enter the village by the name of Zeleny High. Currently, we don't have geolocations that can confirm this, but the resources that posted this information are very reliable, and summarizing everything, this territory might be already under complete Russian control. As for the northern Kupiansk direction, we start receiving very interesting details from different mappers, and today several sources reported that as a result of very heavy clashes between the Russian forces and the Ukrainian army in the northeastern part of the Kupiansk, the Russians were forced to fall back. The Ukrainians managed to carry out several successful counterattacks, and as a result of those counterattacks, the Russians decided to fall back in the direction of the forest bit to the west of settlement by the name of Petropavlovka. We will adjust the map before the next video, and maybe we're going to receive additional details and we will understand what exactly happened in the northeastern part of Kupiansk. As for the Sudzha direction, during the previous 24 hours we continue receiving lots of updates from the territory along the road between the town of Zalesinka, Sverdlikova and Zeleny Shlях. During the previous 24 hours we got lots of videos of how the Russians were FPV droning the Ukrainian forces with the use of new drone with a very powerful communication equipment. As you can see, no problems. The Ukrainians can't jam this, can't break these FPV drones. For example, in comparison, this is the FPV drone with the old type of drones. As you can see, the Ukrainians have possibilities to bring them down without rifle or air defense system work, just with electronic warfare equipment. Anyway, the main concentration of fire is located in the vicinity of the village by the name of Sverdlikova, and most likely the Russians during the next several days are going to carry out several attacks in the area of this town. If the Russians are able to do this, then most likely the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from many territories to the north. Anyway, once again, I'll remind you that according to information we have, according to Syrsky, the Ukrainians are planning to carry out another offensive or counter-offensive operation in upcoming days, which can break the plans, which can change the situation on the ground. So let's wait and see what is going to be next. And you know that according to information that during the previous 24 hours we've been receiving lots of updates, 48 hours from the area of Kazachia Lopan about the Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group entered the territory of Kazachia Lopan and many other things. We can make a conclusion that Ukrainians may try to attack exactly along the line between the city of Kharkiv itself in the direction of Belgorod, because the distance between the border and the city of Belgorod is not so big. The distance is just 28 kilometers, and basically as for the Sudzha direction, the Ukrainians, as a result of their offensive operation, managed to cross even more. The Ukrainians managed to bypass during the first 4 days of offensive operation in this direction up to 450 kilometers. So for them to enter the outskirts of Belgorod is nothing in comparison with the Sudzha offensive operation, because the distance is too short. Maybe the Ukrainians will try to make something like this. We'll see what is going to be. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.